Ni hao, my name is Razorian Book, and today I'm going to show you how to take a bucket of dirt and turn it into clay. That's right, this is episode 2 of my Dorodango series where I make these little balls. Okay, let's stop right here. I decided to commentate over top of this entire video. The reason is I kind of messed things up. I went from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, then back to step 2, then step 3, and then I did some other stuff. So just to make it more clear to you, I'm just going to commentate over the clips and explain the whole process to make this video a little bit more valuable, okay? Okay, let's do this. So there's really only 3 different steps, and it's all just filtering out the stuff you don't want from the clay. The first step here is just literally add water to the dirt that you collected. It's that simple. Okay, so you want to stir up all the dirt, and then you want to let it settle a bit. The reason is that the sand is the heaviest material out of the dirt, so it'll all go to the bottom, and then the clay will layer on top of the sand and the water will rise to the top. That's the way you're separating all the materials. As you can see, I'm using my hands a lot in this video, and I'm mostly doing it just to make the video a little bit more entertaining. You can see my hands are just full of mud, but realistically you want to either have gloves or not use your hands at all. And the reason is because you can find glass and sharp objects in the dirt that you collected. In fact, the first time that I went out and collected dirt, there was actually a lot of glass. So now that everything's stirred up, the first thing that you want to filter out is all the grass, rocks, and pebbles that are inside the dirt. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just using a strainer from the kitchen. It's just to collect all that crap, and you could just throw that straight in the garbage afterwards. So here you can see that all the dirt was really chunky. I could have added water, but I didn't do that. Instead, I filled the bucket underneath with water, and then I dipped the strainer into the water, and you'll see in a second that I filled the bucket right to the top, and it actually made filtering out all the rocks, pebbles, and grass so much easier. So I totally recommend this method here. So that's it for step 1. However, this is me doing it for a second time because sometimes the strainer misses little bits. So if you do it a second time, you'll just catch those little fine pieces that it missed the first time around. Okay, so one important thing to mention is that you should not pour dirt down the drain because of the sand, and all the gritty stuff is going to get stuck in your pipes. You know, a little bit of sand is okay, like when you go to the beach and you go take a shower, that's okay. But when you're dealing with stuff like this, it's quite a bit of sand, so you want to dispose of it some other way. The first few times I did this, I was sticking it down the sink, and then I thought, this doesn't sound like a very good idea. So then I researched it, and yeah, it's not a good idea. Okay, so in the last video, I forgot to show you this part of the Dorodango. Oh yeah, by the way, I think some people call it Dorodango, so I don't really know the correct pronunciation, but it's spelt with an A, so I call it Dorodango. Anyways, this is where I keep them to dry and kind of smooth them out by adding little bits of clay to get them more rounder. And so I got a tray here, and usually I'll do like 12 at a time or something like that. This was just a section of the whole process that I forgot to show in the last video, so I thought I'd show it right now. So if you have too much water in your mix and you want to get some out, just leave it for a few hours, and as you can see here, what happens is all the water rises to the top, and then you can just tip the bucket over and pour the water out. Okay, so this is step 2, and this is how I get rid of the sand. Here I'm using 2 glasses. Later I use 2 buckets, but you can really use anything similar, like cups or mugs or, bottles. The basic idea is that you're going to put some of the mud into, say, this glass, and the sand is going to go at the bottom. So then when you take the mud and the clay out and pour it into a different glass, you can now throw away all that sand that ends up on the bottom of the glass. Then when you transfer the clay back and forth between the glasses, cleaning the glasses every time, then you are slowly extracting all the sand. The problem that I had with this process started here because I didn't realize how much sand was in my clay. So that's why I later do it with the buckets. That way I extracted so much sand, but I didn't realize how much was there, so I was using these little glasses. That's where I went wrong. That's why I had to go from step 2 to step 3. Then I realized what I did, had to go back to step 2. But that's basically the method you can see here, is that I'll transfer the clay to a clean glass, then I'll clean the previous glass, and then transfer the clay back to that glass, and then over and over and just loop it. And you only have to do it, a few times, but the more you do it, the better clay you will get because the more sand you will extract. Okay, so this is the third step, and where as the second step we are filtering out the sand, this is filtering out the water. Basically I take a flower vase, and I'll take a cloth. You could also use pantyhose, but I take this cloth, and I tried different cloths. This type of cloth seemed to work the best. I stick it down in there, and then the bucket of clay there that has like a lot of liquid in it because of the previous step, you're just going to pour that bucket of clay into the cloth, and what happens is the water will seep through the cloth, but the clay, it can't get through the fine fiber, right? So what happens is the water, it can soak through the cloth and wind up at the bottom of the vase, but the clay can't do that. It gets stuck and trapped inside the cloth. So later when you take the cloth out, you will have all the clay and none of the water. There'll still be a little bit of water, but I mean, not that much. At least that's the way it's supposed to go. It didn't really work out so well for me here, but I'll explain that in a second. Now really what I should have done was what I showed you earlier, how you let the bucket sit for a few hours and all the water rises to the top. Then I could have poured that water out, and then when we're on step 3 here and I pour the clay into the cloth, there'd be way less water. I didn't do that, however, but I should have. And one of the reasons is because it takes a lot longer. The second reason here is that when the water rises too high, if it hits the bottom of the cloth, well then the cloth can't drain all the water anymore. So say you set this up for overnight and you go to sleep, if the water rises to the level of the cloth, then it's just going to sit there all night, and you wake up the next morning and find out that it's still not done. Okay, so this is the next morning, and all the water's come out, and you can see the edges are extremely dry, and the inside where all the clay is moist. Where I went wrong was when I was extracting the sand, I just didn't extract enough sand out of it, so that's why I had to redo it after. But up at this point, I think everything's going okay. So here I'm just pulling out the cloth, and I'm going to lay it down on the table.
Now you can squeeze some of the water out, but you will actually squeeze some of the clay out as well. So that's just up to you. I'll leave it at your discretion whether you want to risk losing some clay or not. It depends on how much water you still have left inside the cloth. But mostly this turned out okay. Another method you could do is you could actually take the cloth out of the vase. Say it's summer, you could tie it up to a tree or leave it on your fence, and then the sun will evaporate the water. So that's another method, but right now it's winter here, so I just use this vase as a method to do it. So everything pretty much worked according to plan up until this point. It's just that I realized at this point that I didn't extract enough sand. That's why I had to go back to step 2 again. And that's where I used the buckets rather than the glasses. However, if I would have done it properly, then this would have been basically it. You just take the clay out of the cloth and you're done. It's that simple. You can see there I'm getting some really good chunks. The problem is if you have too much sand in the clay, then it will fall apart. It won't stick together very well. You know when you have clay that is dry, how it just crumbles? Well, it crumbles even worse when you have sand inside the clay, which is one of the main purposes why you have to extract it. So this is where I open it up and realize that there's just way too much sand, and you can clearly see how it just kind of falls apart. This is when I realized that I totally messed up my video and I was going to have to commentate over the entire thing. Now it looks like a lot of clay, but the thing is a lot of that is sand. So when I go back over it again and fix it, I do wind up with a lot less clay. So at some point you gotta decide, do you want really fine clay? Because if you do, you're gonna have less of it. Or you can have clay that's not as good, but you end up with more of it. So it's just kind of a decision. Which would you rather have?
Okay everyone, so I extracted all the water, but there's a problem. Look how crumbly this clay is. It's still got way too much sand in it, so it's just falling apart. It's not because it's dry, it's actually just crumbling. The reason why that is, I was trying to figure it out. I thought maybe I was doing something wrong, but I think I figured it out. It's where I got the dirt from. So I'm going to play you a clip right here of where I went to go get the dirt.
So this is where I went and got the dirt originally. Just took my dog out for a walk near the train station here in Alberta. And because it's winter, it was like freezing cold and I couldn't even feel my hands. So the plan was to just go down in this little small ravine and find the closest dirt that I could find and just dig it up and get the crap out of there. So yeah, looking back at this footage now, you can see why the clay originally didn't turn out, because obviously, well, as I watch this, I can see how much sand is in this dirt. Well, really what I should have done was dug down a couple feet, like a good foot or 2 feet, and then collected all the dirt from underground. But instead I grabbed all this stuff up top, and you could just tell that it's crappy dirt.
We're gonna fix this. Basically I'm just gonna go filter it again. I'm gonna collect all this together, put it in a bucket, and then I'm going to add some water, go through the filtration system again until this clay is good.
Okay, so this is where I decided to fix it all. Basically, I took all the clay, I put it back in a bucket, and I add a bunch more water, and then I used the second method, transferring it back and forth between buckets, and you'll be able to see exactly how much sand I actually missed. So this is the next morning. I left the vase overnight to extract all the water, but what I didn't realize was that the water level had risen so much that it hit the cloth, and then the water stopped extracting. So here I've pulled out the cloth, and I'm just trying to take little bits at the top that are dry, because that's completely done and usable. But in the middle of the cloth, I'm trying to contain all the wet clay where the water never evaporated or drained. And what I'm going to end up doing here is, in order to deal with that, because we're like looking at the third day, and I didn't want to wait for the water to drain out of this clay. So what I ended up doing was mixing it with older clay that I already had. So what ends up happening is that the wet clay will absorb into the hard clay. The hard clay will get softer from the wet clay. It'll all eventually cancel each other out and turn into good clay. And that's exactly what happened here. You can see that the clay's all done. It's good. There's no sand. The only problem with this is that I can't show you how much clay I got out of one bucket, because I mixed it with old previous clay. So that's a test I'm going to have to do for a separate video in the future.
Alright, great news! This is the end of the video. I hope you found it informative. If you want to keep up on this series, make sure you're subscribed. The next episode will be forming the Dorodango out of clay. So smash the like button, smash your screen, all the stuff, and I will see you again on another video very soon. Alright, okay, peace.